The corroded pipes dripped condensation, like they were trying to become weather. Corman wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of industrial grime across his forehead. The air recyclers in Sector 8 hadn't functioned properly in months, but nobody at Calder Station seemed to care. Nobody cared about much of anything here. Rain adjusted the soil probe settings and focused on the readout. Another sample. Another day of cataloging the slow death of yet another world. The irony wasn't lost on him. A former ecological diplomat reduced to taking soil samples in the armpit of the galaxy. At least soil didn't argue back. Soil didn't scream when you failed it. Acidity levels increasing, he muttered to his recorder. Heavy metal contamination consistent with northern quadrant profiles. He paused, frowning at the flickering display. Sample 408J demonstrates continued degradation. Viable microbe count down 12% from last quarter. Just numbers, just data. Just another dying planet to add to his archives. A sound caught his attention. Not the usual creaking of the station's aging infrastructure, but something organic. Something alive. Rain turned toward the drainage shaft, peering into the shadows. The sector was supposed to be empty at this hour. He'd chosen the time deliberately to avoid the regular workers and their stares, their whispers. "Hello?" His voice echoed against metal walls. The sound came again, a splash, followed by a scraping noise. Rain reached for his light and directed it toward the half-flooded shaft. The beam caught movement, then reflected off eyes. Large, reflective eyes, blinking in the sudden brightness. A figure emerged from the muck, humanoid, but covered head to toe in thick, dripping mud. Only those eyes were clearly visible, wide with fear or exhaustion or both. The creature, no, the person, staggered forward, slipping on the wet floor. Rain stepped closer, his light revealing more details through the coating of filth. Slender limbs, a female form, trembling with cold or terror. "Are you hurt?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Do you need help?" Before she could answer, the service door at the far end of the corridor slammed open. 3 station laborers lumbered in, their heavy boots splashing through puddles of condensation. "Oi, Corman!" The largest one, a bulk-browed man called Tack, pointed a gloved finger. "That thing bothering you?" Rain shifted, instinctively moving to place himself between the newcomers and the mud-covered woman. "Just finishing up my soil samples," he said evenly. "What do you want, Tack?" The 3 men spread out, forming a loose semicircle. "That's merchandise you're blocking," Tack said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Crawled out of the drainage about an hour ago. Been tracking it through half the sector." "She's not merchandise," Rain said, the words out before he could consider their wisdom. "She's a person." The smallest of the 3 men snorted. "That filth? You need your eyes checked. Dirt digger. It's a Mayari. Too dirty to touch, but worth plenty to the right buyer." Rain's stomach clenched. Mayari. The aquatic humanoids from Kesson 3. There shouldn't be any left. Not after the sterilization protocols. Not after what Rain had failed to prevent 5 years ago. He looked back at the trembling figure, understanding her coating of mud in a new light. Not accident, camouflage, protection. "She doesn't look like merchandise to me," Rain said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "She looks like someone who needs medical attention." Tack stepped forward, palm resting on the shock prod at his belt. "Don't get yourself in trouble, Corman. That thing's already tagged for collection. Just step aside and let us take care of business." Rain heard the mud-covered woman's breath quicken behind him. He made his decision without really deciding at all. Slipping off his thermal coat, he held it out behind him without turning around. "Here," he said softly. "Put this on." A moment's hesitation. Then he felt the weight of the coat leave his hand. "You're making a mistake," said the 3rd laborer, a wiry man with patchy stubble. "Those things aren't human. They're not even animals. They're filth. Rain squared his shoulders. She's leaving with me. Go file a complaint with station management if you want. Tack's hand tightened on his prod. You know the rules. Corpsman. Salvage rights. We found it first. She found me, Rain countered, backing up slowly. And she's not salvage. She's a survivor. He felt a touch on his back, the woman's hand, trembling but there. Taking his cue, he continued backing up, guiding her toward the corridor that led to his module. The boss won't like this, Tack warned. Those things fetch good credit off station. I'll take my chances. Rain kept moving, never taking his eyes off the three men. I'm sure your boss would love a formal inquiry about illegal trafficking, too. The threat was empty. Everyone knew station management turned a blind eye to the black market that kept Calder Station afloat. But bureaucracy was still bureaucracy, and paperwork was the universal deterrent. Tack spat on the floor. Your funeral, dirt digger. That thing will slit your throat while you sleep. Rain said nothing, continuing to guide the woman backward until they reached the bend in the corridor. Only then did he turn, placing a gentle hand on her elbow through the coat. My module is this way, he said quietly. Can you walk? She nodded, a barely perceptible movement beneath the mud. Together, they moved quickly through the dimly lit passageways, Rain checking each intersection before proceeding. The woman matched his pace despite her obvious exhaustion, her bare feet leaving muddy prints on the metal floor. 5 minutes later, they reached Rain's living quarters. He pressed his palm to the scanner, waited for the confirming beep, then ushered her inside. The door slid shut behind them with a reassuring hiss of sealed air. Rain's module was small, but orderly, a combination sleeping area and workstation, with a tiny hygiene unit in one corner and a simple galley in another. Warm amber light from his grow-white diffusers gave the space a softer appearance than the harsh fluorescence of the station corridors. The woman stood just inside the door, dripping mud onto the floor, clutching his coat around her like armor. You're safe here, Rain said, keeping his distance. My name is Rain Corpsman. I work as a soil specialist. He gestured to his cramped workspace with its array of sample containers and analysis equipment. This is my home. You can stay as long as you need to. She remained silent, those large eyes fixed on him with an unreadable expression. Are you hungry? Thirsty? He asked, moving slowly toward the galley. I have clean water, some protein cubes. Nothing fancy, but it's food. Still no response. Rain filled a cup with filtered water and placed it on the small table between them, then stepped back. Please, drink if you're thirsty. She looked at the cup, then at him, then back at the cup. Finally, with deliberate slowness, she reached one mud-caked hand from beneath the coat and took the water. She didn't drink immediately, instead, holding the cup close to her face, studying its contents. It's clean, Rain assured her. Filtered 3 times. After another moment of hesitation, she brought the cup to her lips and took a small sip. Then another. Then she drained the cup in a series of quick, desperate swallows. More? Rain asked, and at her nod, refilled the cup. While she drank, Rain considered their situation. The laborers would be back, probably with reinforcements. If this woman was truly Mayari, she was valuable and vulnerable. The Mayari had been rare even before the Kesson 3 disaster. Now, they were practically extinct. And Rain had helped make them that way. He pushed the thought aside. You can use the cleansing unit if you want, he said, gesturing to the hygiene corner. Get cleaned up. I'll find you some clothes. The woman tensed, clutching the coat tighter. Or not, Rain added quickly. Whatever you're comfortable with. The mud, it protects you, doesn't it? A barely perceptible nod. You don't have to clean it off if you don't want to. But you're safe here. No one will hurt you in my module. She studied him, her gaze direct despite her obvious fear. Then, to Rain's surprise, she spoke, a single word in a language he hadn't heard in 5 years. Surilvar, she whispered. Rain frowned, searching his memory. His diplomatic work had required a passing familiarity with Mayari language, though he'd never been fluent. Surilvar, he repeated, testing the sound. Is that your name? She shook her head slightly, then touched her chest with one finger. Surilvar, she said again, a little louder. Understanding dawned. Ah, that's the Mayari word for wet clay, isn't it? At her nod, he continued. They called you that, the slavers? Another nod, accompanied by a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. That's not a name, Rain said firmly. That's not who you are. Would you like me to call you something else? Or do you have a name in your own language? She hesitated, then whispered something too soft for him to hear. I'm sorry, could you say that again? Ilara, she repeated, the word so quiet it was barely audible. My name, Ilara. Ilara, Rain said, smiling slightly. It's good to meet you. Ilara, I promise I'll do everything I can to help you. The tension in her shoulders eased fractionally. She glanced at the hygiene unit, then back at Rain. Would you like to get cleaned up now? He asked. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. The controls are simple, Rain explained, keeping his distance as she moved toward the unit. Blue for cold, red for hot. The soap dispenser is on the left. Take as long as you need. I'll find you some clean clothes and prepare something to eat. While Ilara disappeared behind the privacy screen of the hygiene unit, Rain quickly searched through his limited wardrobe. He settled on a soft thermo-knit shirt and a pair of elasticized trousers with a drawstring waist. They would be too large, but they were clean and warm. He heard the water start. Then a small gasp that might have been surprise or relief, giving her privacy. Rain turned his attention to the galley. His food stores were basic: protein cubes, nutrient packs, a few precious fresh items he'd traded soil samples for. He selected a packet of rehydratable root vegetable stew and a protein bar, then added a small vial of kelp oil, a luxury item, but one that might be familiar to an aquatic species like the Mayari. As the stew heated, Rain couldn't help but think about Kasan 3. He'd been there as part of the Ecological Diplomatic Corps, tasked with assessing the planet's suitability for human colonization. The official report had declared the Mayari population statistically negligible and recommended limited terraforming with minimal displacement. What actually happened was neither limited nor minimal. Rain's protests had been filed, reviewed, and ignored. He'd resigned his position afterward, retreating to the far reaches of colonized space, taking the soil specialist job on Calder Station, where he could avoid facing other sentient beings, where he could pretend his failure hadn't contributed to genocide. And now one of the survivors was in his shower. The water stopped. Rain busied himself with the food, arranging it on his small table, trying to make the utilitarian meal seem welcoming. He heard the rustle of clothing behind the privacy screen, then footsteps. When he turned, Ilara stood in the center of the module, transformed. The mud was gone, revealing dusky green skin with faint, iridescent patterns along her arms and neck. Her hands were slightly webbed between the fingers, and gill-like structures pulsed gently at the sides of her throat. Her hair, free of mud, was startlingly white, falling in long, damp strands past her shoulders. Rain's clothes hung loosely on her slender frame, but she'd managed to roll the sleeves and pant legs to make them functional. Most striking were her eyes, large, silver-pupilled, and much more expressive now that they weren't surrounded by mud. They regarded Rain with caution, but also with a hint of something that might have been hope. "You look—" Rain fumbled for the right word. Beautiful came to mind, but seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. "Better," he finished lamely. "How do you feel?" Clean, Ilara said, the word tentative, as if she were testing it. Strange. Rain gestured to the table. I've made some food, if you'd like to eat. She approached cautiously, studying the simple meal. Food, she echoed, then looked up at Rain. For me? Yes, for you. Rain pulled out the chair for her, then seated himself across the small table. Please, eat. Ilara sat, her movements fluid despite her obvious tension. She mimicked Rain's posture, waiting until he took a spoonful of stew before cautiously trying it herself. The first taste made her eyes widen. Hot, she said, but continued eating, each spoonful more confident than the last. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Rain tried not to stare, but found himself noticing details about her now visible features. The slight point to her ears, the way her throat pulsed rhythmically as if she were still filtering water, the careful precision of her movements. How did you come to be on Calder Station? He asked finally. I thought... He hesitated, not wanting to bring up painful memories. I didn't think any Miari had survived the... He couldn't find a gentle way to say it. The killing, Ilara supplied, her voice soft but steady. Most did not. My mother. She paused, her silver eyes growing distant. My mother covered me in mud, said, Stay still, breathe slow. Mud keeps us safe. I was small. I listened. Her hands trembled slightly. They came with fire and poison. I stayed in mud. Many days, many nights, until water turned clear again. Rain felt sick. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were wholly inadequate. I was there, on Kesson 3. I tried to stop it. I filed reports, petitioned the council, but I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't enough. Ilara studied him, her expression unreadable. You were there, before the killing? Yes. Rain couldn't meet her eyes. I was part of the assessment team. We were supposed to evaluate the planet for colonization, make recommendations for coexistence with indigenous life. But the corporate interests... He shook his head. They already had plans. They just needed our report as a formality. You knew Niall? Ilara asked suddenly. Rain looked up, startled. Niall? Yes, I knew her. She was the Miari representative to our team. She was brilliant, passionate about protecting your people's rights. The memory of Niall's face, determined and proud even as the council dismissed her concerns, surfaced with painful clarity. How did you know her? My mother's sister, Ilara said simply. She told stories about humans who listened. I thought all were lies. The connection hit Rain like a physical blow. Niall's family. This woman was Niall's family. The diplomat who had trusted Rain to advocate for her people, who had shared her knowledge and her culture in the belief that it would help save her world. And Rain had failed her. Failed all of them. All. I'm sorry, he said again, the words scraping his throat. I should have done more. I should have found a way. Ilara was quiet for a long moment. Then, with deliberate care, she reached across the table and touched the back of Rain's hand, the briefest contact, but intentional. You helped me, she said. Today, it wasn't absolution, but it was something. Rain nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. They finished their meal in silence. As Rain cleared the dishes, Ilara rose and began to explore the small module, her movements cautious but curious. She paused at his workstation, studying the rows of labeled soil samples. These worlds? She asked, gesturing at the collection. Yes, Rain said, coming to stand beside her. Soil samples from different planets, moons, asteroids. Each one tells a story about the place it came from. Ilara touched one of the containers gently. This one. That's from Karen, a desert world. Very fine, silicate-based soil, good for growing certain types of drought-resistant crops. She moved to another sample. This? Silicate. Heavy, volcanic, rich in minerals but too acidic for most plants without treatment. Ilara continued her exploration, touching each container lightly, listening as Rain described the worlds they represented. She stopped at a drawer labeled Mayari Biomes and looked at Rain questioningly. Yes, he said quietly. I have samples from Kesson 3. I've been trying to preserve what I can, keeping records, maintaining viable samples in case. He trailed off, not sure how to explain his compulsion to document what had been lost. Ilara placed her hand flat against the drawer, as if making a connection to her homeworld through the thin metal. Memory, she said. You keep memory. I try, Rain admitted. It doesn't fix anything, but... Memory is life, Ilara said, the words carrying the weight of a proverb. She turned to Rain, studying his face. Why did you help me, when they called me filth? Rain considered the question. Because you're not filth. You're a person, and because... He hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I didn't help enough before. I couldn't save your world. But maybe I could save you. Ilara nodded slowly, accepting his answer. Then, without warning, she reached out and touched the scar on Rain's left wrist, a thin white line where his identity chip had been removed and replaced with the station-issued version. Pain, she said. Yes, Rain confirmed, but it was a long time ago. She withdrew her hand. I will sleep now, she announced, her voice betraying her exhaustion despite its matter-of-fact tone. Of course, Rain said. You can take the bed. I'll use the floor. Ilara glanced at the narrow cot that served as Rain's bed, then at the floor. Together, she said. Safer. Rain blinked in surprise. Are you sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Safer together, Ilara repeated. I sleep light. Hear danger first. Rain understood the practical logic, but was still caught off guard by the trust it implied. All right, he agreed. But wake me if you need anything. He found an extra blanket and pillow in the storage compartment under his cot. Then dimmed the lights to quarter brightness, enough to see by, but soft enough for sleep. Ilara watched his preparations with curious eyes, then climbed onto the cot and pressed herself against the wall, leaving space for Rain. Hesitantly, Rain lay down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance on the narrow bed. Ilara pulled the blanket over both of them, then settled into a position facing the door. Her body tense despite her claimed exhaustion. Try to rest, Rain said softly. You're safe here. Safe, Ilara repeated, as if testing the unfamiliar concept. For now. Rain wanted to promise more, wanted to tell her that he would protect her, that she would never have to hide in mud again, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he said, I'll help you find somewhere better than Calder Station, somewhere you can live freely. Ilara's breathing had already slowed, her exhaustion finally claiming her. Just before she drifted off, she murmured, You are somewhere better. Rain lay awake long after Ilara had fallen asleep, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a physical thing. He thought of Nail, of his failed attempts to save Kesson 3, of all the reports he'd filed that hadn't been enough to stop a genocide. He wouldn't fail again, not this time, not her. Eventually, sleep claimed him too, dreamless and deep. Rain woke to the sound of breathing, not Ilara's gentle rhythm, but his own, carefully controlled. It took him a moment to realize he was mimicking a pattern, following Ilara's lead as she sat cross-legged at the foot of the cot, her eyes closed, her hands resting palms up on her knees. Breathing ritual, she explained without opening her eyes, somehow sensing that he was awake. Cleanse blood, clears mind. Rain matched her pattern. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out, feeling his head grow lighter with each cycle. "Good," Ilara said after several minutes. "You learn quick." "Thank you for teaching me," Rain said, sitting up slowly. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes." She opened her eyes, fixing him with that direct silver gaze. "No bad dreams. Strange." Rain smiled slightly. "That's good." He glanced at the chronometer on his desk. "I should check in with the station system. Make sure everything's normal." Normal being a relative term on Calder Station, where power fluctuations and life support hiccups were routine. He moved to his workstation and accessed the station grid, scanning for any unusual activity in Sector 8. What he found made his stomach tighten. An unauthorized override request on his private comm node, logged at 400 hours. Someone had tried to access his module systems while they slept. "We might have a problem," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the surge of adrenaline. "Someone tried to get into the module's computer last night." Ilara was instantly alert, her posture shifting from relaxed to coiled tension. "They come soon," she said with certainty. "I smell them." Rain looked at her in surprise. "You can smell them? Through the sealed door?" "Air recyclers connect all modules," she explained. "Slavers smell like fear sweat and chemical wash. Station workers smell like oil and metal dust." She tilted her head slightly. "You smell like soil and clean water." "How long do we have?" Ilara closed her eyes, concentrating. "Hours, not minutes. They wait for shift change. Less witnesses." Rain nodded, mind racing. "We need to leave before then. There's a drift station 3 sectors from here, off the main corporate grid, mostly independent miners and traders. If we can get there, we might find transport to somewhere safer." "How?" Ilara asked practically. "They watch doors." "Not all doors," Rain said, moving to his workstation and pulling up the station schematics he'd downloaded when he first arrived. A habit from his diplomatic days. Always knowing the exits. "There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the southern dock hub. We'd have to cross 2 sectors, but it's less monitored than the main corridors." Ilara considered this. "Need credentials. Dock checks IDs." "I can handle that," Rain said, already accessing the forgery program he'd kept hidden in his soil analysis software. Another relic of his former life. Diplomatic credentials could be modified in a pinch, when bureaucracy threatened mission success. "It won't fool a full security scan, but it should get us through a routine dock check." While the program ran, Rain gathered essential supplies, water pouches, protein bars, a small med kit, his most important soil samples. He hesitated over his collection from Kesson 3, then carefully selected 3 vials, each labeled with Mayari script that Nail had written herself. He couldn't save them all, but he could preserve these. Ilara watched his preparations with a practical eye, occasionally suggesting adjustments. More water, less food, and bring thermal blanket. Space is cold. Her calm efficiency impressed Rain. Despite her ordeal, she was focused and clear-headed. As he worked, Rain noticed Ilara by his desk, her fingers working with something he couldn't see. "What are you doing?" he asked. She held up a small lump of clay. Actual clay, not the mud she'd been covered in. "Where did you get that?" "Soil sample," she explained, pointing to a container labeled Terra Agricultural, clay loam. "Needed just small piece." Rain should have been upset about the contamination of his sample, but found he didn't care. "What are you making?" Ilara's fingers worked the clay with practiced precision. "Talisman," she said. "Protection." As Rain watched, the clay took shape, a small oval with an intricate pattern pressed into its surface. Ilara held it up for his inspection. "Mayari glyph," she explained, "means no word in your language." She frowned in concentration. Closest meaning, moment before trust becomes touch. "It's beautiful," Rain said, genuinely moved by both the craftsmanship and the sentiment. Thank you. Ilara pressed the clay talisman into his palm. Keep safe, she said. Remember me if we separate. The implication was clear. If they were caught, if she was taken, he would have this token to remember her by. Rain closed his fingers around the clay, feeling its smooth texture, still warm from her hands. We won't be separated, he promised, meeting her eyes. We leave together. We stay together. Ilara held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Together, she agreed. The forgery program chimed, interrupting the moment. Rain turned back to his workstation to check the results. 2 sets of credentials. Basic worker IDs with dot clearance. Nothing fancy, but hopefully enough to get them through. These should work, he said, transferring the data to portable chips. We'll need to leave soon, before the next shift change. He checked the chronometer. That gives us about 40 minutes. Ilara nodded, already moving to gather the supplies Rain had assembled. She worked methodically, packing everything into a small duffel that would attract minimal attention. Rain watched her efficient movements, struck again by her resilience. Ilara, he said suddenly, I'm sorry about Kesson 3, about Nail, about all of it. She paused in her work, looking up at him with those silver eyes. You tried, she said simply. Others did not try at all. Before Rain could respond, the security panel by the door emitted a harsh buzz. Someone attempting to override the lock. Ilara froze, her hands tightening on the bag she was packing. They're early, Rain muttered, moving quickly to the security panel. The override attempt was sophisticated, cycling through access codes at high speed. It wouldn't take long to break through. Back door, Ilara said urgently, pointing to the maintenance access panel behind Rain's desk. Now. Rain nodded, grabbing the bag from Ilara and slinging it over his shoulder. He moved his desk aside, revealing the small access hatch that connected to the station's maintenance ducts. It was meant for repair drones, not humans, but they didn't have a choice. As he worked to unseal the hatch, the buzzing at the main door grew more insistent. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Rain paused, listening. Silence. Then a series of metallic clicks. Manual override. They're coming through, he whispered. Get in the duct. Ilara shook her head. You first, I'm smaller, faster. When Rain hesitated, she added, Trust me. The main door began to slide open. The security measures defeated. Rain made his decision, dropping into the narrow maintenance duct, the bag clutched to his chest. He looked up just in time to see Ilara seal the hatch behind him, cutting off his view of the module. Ilara, he called, his voice barely a whisper. What are you doing? No response. Rain pressed his ear against the hatch, straining to hear what was happening in his module. Footsteps, heavy, booted footsteps, at least 3 sets. Where are they? A gruff voice, not tack, but similar in its casual brutality. Check the hygiene unit. Another voice, higher pitched, nervous. Movement, the sounds of searching. Then a crash as something was overturned. Corman, the first voice again. We know you're in here. Come out now. And maybe we don't report you for interfering with licensed recovery. Licensed recovery. Slavers with permits. Then, somehow worse than the unofficial kind. Rain held his breath, listening for any sound of Ilara. Where had she hidden? Why hadn't she followed him into the duct? More crashes, more searching, then a sudden silence. What was that? The nervous voice. A thud, followed by a grunt of pain. Then chaos, shouts, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, the distinctive crackle of a shock prod activating. Rain couldn't stand it. He had to see what was happening, had to help Ilara. He pressed against the hatch, trying to force it open from the inside. Just as he managed to create a small gap, a body slammed against the other side, one of the slavers, judging by the curse that followed. Rain froze, watching through the narrow opening. His module was in disarray, furniture overturned, his soil samples scattered across the floor. 3 men in nondescript utilitarian clothing, the slavers, were spread around the room. One was down, clutching his throat, a shock prod lying useless beside him. Another was backing toward the door, a small pistol in his hand. The third was picking himself up off the floor in front of the maintenance hatch, blood streaming from his nose. And in the center of it all was Alara, not hiding, not cowering, but moving with fluid grace that belied her slender frame. She ducked under the swing of the bloodied slaver, using his momentum to send him crashing into the wall. Then, she was across the room, tackling the armed man before he could aim properly. Rain watched in astonishment as Alara disarmed the slaver with a precise strike to his wrist. Then, used his own shock prod against him. The man convulsed, then collapsed. 2 down, 1 to go. The bloodied slaver had recovered enough to charge at Alara, roaring with rage. She sidestepped neatly, but her foot slipped on a scattered soil sample, throwing off her balance just enough for the slaver to grab her arm. Rain didn't think. He pushed the hatch open with all his strength and launched himself into the module, the bag of supplies forgotten in the duct. The slaver had Alara by the throat now, pressing her against the wall, her feet barely touching the ground. Rain grabbed the nearest object, a soil compression rod from his workstation, and swung it with all his might at the slaver's head. The man released Alara, turning just in time to catch the blow on his shoulder instead of his skull. He staggered, but didn't fall. "You're dead, dirt digger," the slaver snarled, reaching for something at his belt. Rain recognized the distinctive shape of a neural disruptor, illegal on most civilized worlds, but common enough in the outer stations. He swung the compression rod again, this time catching the slaver's hand before he could activate the weapon. The slaver howled in pain, but managed to backhand Rain with his other hand, sending him stumbling into the overturned desk. Before Rain could recover, the slaver was on him, meaty hands closing around his throat. "Should have minded your own business," the man growled, his breath hot on Rain's face. "Now, you get to watch while we take the merchandise. Then you get a long, slow—" He never finished the sentence. A flash of green and white, and suddenly the slaver was being dragged backward. Alara's arm locked around his neck in a precise chokehold. The man thrashed, trying to break free, but Alara held firm, her face a mask of cold determination. "Hurt him again," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "and I snap your neck." The slaver went still, recognizing the truth in her words. Rain pushed himself up, rubbing his bruised throat. "The disruptor," he croaked. "Get the disruptor." Alara nodded, maintaining her hold on the slaver while Rain retrieved the dropped weapon. He examined it briefly, confirmed it was charged, then aimed it at the slaver. "Let him go," he told Alara. "I've got him covered." Alara released her hold, stepping back with fluid grace. The slaver gasped for breath, reaching for his throat. "Don't move," Rain warned, keeping the disruptor trained on the man's chest. "Neural scrambling isn't pleasant. I hear—" The slaver glared but remained still. "You're making a big mistake. That thing's already paid for. The buyer will send more than just us when we don't report in." "She's not a thing," Rain said, his voice hard. "She's a person, with a name." A sound at the door made all 3 of them turn. 2 station miners stood in the open doorway, taking in the scene with practiced wariness. One held a plasma torch, the other a heavy wrench. Both looked more annoyed than surprised. "Trouble, Corman?" asked the one with the torch, a grizzled woman with a complex tattoo covering half her face. "Just some unwanted visitors," Rain replied, not lowering the disruptor. "They were just leaving." The woman snorted. "Doesn't look like they were planning on leaving with all their teeth." She nudged one of the unconscious slavers with her boot. "These the same skags that have been running unlicensed salvage through the back docks?" "Probably," Rain said, watching the conscious slaver carefully. They seem to think they have rights to my friend here. The second miner, a tall, thin man with prosthetic eyes, made a disgusted noise. Slave runners. Thought station management cleared that operation out last cycle. New management. New rules, the woman said with a shrug. She fixed the conscious slaver with a hard stare. But same old miners who don't like their comm signals getting crossed by your fancy jammers. Bad for business. That. Understanding dawned on Rain. The miners hadn't come to help out of the goodness of their hearts. They'd tracked the signal interference the slavers were using to mask their activities. So what now? Rain asked, still holding the disruptor steady. The woman considered for a moment, then grinned, revealing metal-capped teeth. Now we escort these gentlemen to the nearest airlock and have a friendly chat about signal etiquette. She glanced at Alara, her expression softening slightly. You two might want to make yourselves scarce, though can't guarantee how long our chat will keep them occupied. Rain nodded, catching Alara's eye. She inclined her head slightly. Agreement. We were just leaving, Rain said. Got a transport to catch. The male miner stepped forward, wrench held casually but prominently. We'll take care of your guests. Go on, get your things. Rain didn't need to be told twice. He retreated to the maintenance hatch, retrieving the supply bag while keeping one eye on the slavers. Alara moved to the scattered soil samples, quickly gathering the ones labeled in Mayari script. The woman miner watched her with interest. You're Mayari, aren't you? Thought your kind were all gone after Kesson 3. Alara stiffened but continued her task. Not all, she said quietly. Some remember. Good, the miner said, her voice gruff but sincere. Galaxy needs all the memory it can get these days. She turned back to the slavers, her expression hardening again. Right, you lot. On your feet. Time for that chat. Under the miner's watchful eyes, the conscious slaver reluctantly helped rouse his companions. The three were marched out of the module, leaving Rain and Alara alone amid the destruction. Are you hurt? Rain asked immediately, moving to Alara's side. She shook her head. No, you? Nothing serious. He touched his throat gingerly. Just some bruises. You were amazing. Where did you learn to fight like that? A ghost of a smile touched Alara's lips. Mayari children learn to swim before walking. Water fighting, all about flow, using opponent's force. Same principles on land. The smile faded. Useful skill. For surviving. Rain nodded, understanding. We should go, before more come. Yes. Alara handed him the Mayari soil samples she'd salvaged. These important. Keep safe. Rain tucked them carefully into the supply bag, then checked the forged credentials, one last time. The maintenance tunnel will take us to the southern dock. From there, we find transport to the drift station. He hesitated, then added, Are you sure you want to come with me? The miners might be able to help you find safer passage. Ilara's silver eyes held his gaze steadily. I'm sure, she said simply. Together. Something warm unfurled in Rain's chest. Trust, perhaps, or hope. He nodded. Together. They left through the main door. The maintenance tunnel, no longer necessary with the slavers gone. Rain led the way through the back corridors of Sector 8, avoiding the main thoroughfares where station workers would be changing shifts. Alara moved silently beside him, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit. They reached the southern dock without incident, joining the small crowd of workers and traders waiting for transport clearance. Rain kept his head down, one hand on the disruptor hidden in his pocket, the other clutching their forged credentials. Beside him, Alara had pulled up the hood of the jacket he'd given her, concealing her distinctive features. The dock officer barely glanced at their IDs, waving them through with bored efficiency. Rain didn't relax until they were seated in the transport shuttle, the hatch sealed behind them, the gentle vibration of engines signaling departure. "We made it," he murmured, allowing himself a small smile. Ilara nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. She leaned against him slightly, not for warmth or comfort, he realized, but to whisper in his ear. "You're back," she said, so quietly that only he could hear. "You're hurt." Rain shifted, suddenly aware of a wet warmth spreading across his lower back. "I think one of them might have caught me with something," he admitted. "But it can wait until we reach the drift station." Ilara's expression told him she disagreed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she pressed closer, providing subtle support as the transport shuttle detached from Calder Station and began its short journey to the drift station. The trip passed in tense silence, Rain fighting to stay alert despite the growing pain in his back. Ilara, watchful beside him. When the shuttle finally docked, they were among the first to disembark, moving quickly through the crowded arrival area. The drift station was everything Calder Station wasn't. Chaotic, colorful, alive. Traders from a dozen systems hawked their wares in makeshift stalls. The air thick with the scents of exotic foods and the sounds of multiple languages. No one looked twice at a human and a Mayari walking together. The station was a haven for those seeking anonymity. Rain led them to a quiet corner, then sagged against the wall, his strength finally giving out. "Need to find." "Medic," he managed, his vision blurring. Ilara's face swam before him, her silver eyes wide with concern. "You're hurt worse than you said," she accused softly. "Why hide?" "Had to get you safe," Rain mumbled. "My fault. All of it. Kesson 3. Nail. Had to make it right." Ilara's cool hand touched his forehead. "Foolish human," she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only worry. "Come. I see medical symbol there." She supported him as they made their way to a small clinic tucked between a parts dealer and a food stall. The medic, a gruff woman with 6 fingers on each hand, took one look at Rain and ushered them into a treatment room. "Knife wound," she diagnosed, cutting away Rain's shirt to reveal a long, shallow gash across his lower back. "Not deep, but messy, and starting to infect. You're lucky you came when you did." Rain hissed as she cleaned the wound. "Didn't even feel it happen," he admitted. "Must have been during the fight." "Adrenaline," the medic said, knowingly. "Hell of a painkiller." She glanced at Ilara, who hadn't left Rain's side. "Your friend can stay, but she needs to sit down before she falls down. You both look like you've been through the recycler." Ilara reluctantly took a seat, her eyes never leaving Rain as the medic worked. When the wound was cleaned and sealed, the medic administered a broad-spectrum antibiotic and a mild painkiller. "Rest," she ordered, pointing to the narrow cot in the corner of the treatment room. "At least 4 hours. Then you can go wherever you're going." She looked between them. "And I don't want to know where that is. Less I know, better for all of us." After she left, Rain turned to Ilara. "You should get some rest too," he said, noticing the exhaustion lining her face. Ilara shook her head. "I watch. You sleep." "We're safe here," Rain insisted. "The drift station has its own security. Slavers can't operate openly here." "Still watch," Ilara said stubbornly. "My turn to protect." Rain wanted to argue, but the painkiller was already taking effect, making his thoughts fuzzy. "Just for a little while," he conceded, letting his eyes close. "Then we'll find transport. Somewhere safer." "Yes," Ilara agreed. "Somewhere with water and soil. Somewhere to grow things." Rain smiled at that, the image of Ilara surrounded by growing things pulling him toward sleep. "Sounds perfect," he murmured. The last thing he felt before drifting off was Ilara's cool hand on his forehead, and her soft voice saying, "You're hurt." "I've had worse," he managed to reply. "I know," she said, "but no more. Not while I'm here." Rain slept deeply. free of dreams for the first time in years. When he woke, Ilara was still beside him, her silver eyes watching over him with quiet intensity. "How long?" he asked, sitting up carefully, testing his newly healed back. 6 hours, Ilara replied. "You needed rest." Rain stretched, surprised to find the pain almost gone. "Thank you," he said, "for watching over me." Ilara inclined her head slightly. "Together," she reminded him. "Now we go?" "Now we go," Rain agreed. He reached for the supply bag, checking its contents. "I have enough credits for basic transport. Not much choice of destination, though." "Don't need choice," Ilara said. "Just need a way." They left the clinic, thanking the medic, who waved them off with practiced indifference. The drift station was entering its night cycle. The lights dimmed, the crowds thinned. Rain led them to the transport hub, studying the departure board. "There," he said, pointing to a listing. "Supply run to Aguar 6, mining colony, mostly abandoned now. Minimal population, low security presence." Ilara read the description below the listing. "Reclamation status," she noted. "Atmosphere thin but breathable. Early flora growth." She looked at Rain. "Good soil?" Rain smiled at her focus on what truly mattered. "From what I've heard, yes." They started terraforming, then abandoned the project when the mineral deposits didn't yield as expected. But the process had already taken hold. Native mosses adapted. Some Earth species established themselves. It's a wilderness now, but a living one. "Good," Ilara said decisively. "We go there." They secured passage on the supply vessel, a rattling old hauler piloted by a taciturn woman who asked no questions as long as their credits cleared. The journey to Aguar 6 took 3 days, during which Rain and Ilara shared the cramped passenger quarters, talking little but finding comfort in each other's presence. Rain learned that Ilara could hold her breath for nearly 10 minutes, a trait that had helped her survive the mud hibernation after the Kesson 3 disaster. He discovered that she could detect minute changes in air composition, a skill that had alerted her to the slaver's approach on Calder Station. And he found that when she felt safe enough to relax, she would hum melodies in a haunting minor key that made his heart ache with their beauty. In turn, Ilara learned that Rain had once been able to identify thousands of soil types by touch and smell alone, that he kept detailed journals of every world he'd visited, and that he hadn't forgiven himself for a single one of his perceived failures. She listened as he spoke of Nail, of the diplomatic corps, of his resignation and self-imposed exile. And she watched as he carefully tended the Mayari soil samples, treating them as precious artifacts of a lost world. On the 3rd day, as they approached Aguar 6, Rain found Ilara staring out the small viewport, her expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, joining her. "Names," she replied. "My name, your name, new names." "You want to change your name?" She shook her head. "Not change. Add." She turned to face him. "Mayari have many names. Birth name, adult name, chosen name. I was too young for chosen name when..." She didn't need to finish. "And now you want to choose one," Rain said, understanding. "Yes." Ilara placed her hand over his, her webbed fingers cool against his skin. "New world, new name, new life. Have you decided on one?" A small smile curved her lips. "Not yet. We'll know when right time comes." The hauler shuddered as it entered Aguar 6's thin atmosphere, ending their conversation. They strapped in for landing, the vessel groaning in protest as it descended toward the settlement area. When they emerged from the hauler, Rain's first impression of Aguar 6 was one of unexpected beauty. The abandoned mining colony sprawled across a shallow valley, its utilitarian structures now softened by creeping moss and vine-like growth. Beyond the settlement, fields of knee-high, pale grass rippled in the gentle breeze, looking like waves on a green sea. The sky was a washed-out blue. The sunlight filtered through thin clouds that gave everything a dreamlike quality. "It's beautiful," he said, surprised by the emotion in his voice. Beside him, Ilara closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "Good air," she pronounced. "Young, but good. Water nearby." She opened her eyes, looking at Rain with quiet joy. "We can live here." They found an abandoned residential module at the edge of the settlement, far enough from the supply depot to offer privacy, but close enough for access to basic necessities. The module was in better condition than they'd hoped. Its solar collectors still functional. Its water recycling system salvageable with minor repairs. Over the next few weeks, they transformed the space into something that was uniquely theirs. Rain converted half the living area into a greenhouse laboratory, setting up his soil analysis equipment and starting experimental plantings with seeds he'd brought from Calder Station. Ilara created a hydration zone in the other half, a series of shallow pools where she could immerse herself when her aquatic physiology required it. They established a routine: mornings spent tending the growing plants, afternoons exploring the surrounding area, evenings comparing notes on soil conditions and water quality. Rain mapped the valley's mineral deposits, while Ilara developed an uncanny ability to predict weather changes based on atmospheric pressure shifts that Rain couldn't even detect. They rarely spoke of Kesson 3, or of the slavers, or of their narrow escape. Instead, they focused on the future, on the new varieties of moss that had colonized the hillsides, on the small, amphibian-like creatures they'd discovered in a nearby spring, on the seeds that had sprouted in Rain's carefully prepared soil beds. One evening, as they sat outside their module, watching twin moons rise over the valley, Ilara broke their comfortable silence. "I've chosen," she said. Rain looked at her, understanding immediately. "Your new name?" She nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Arava." "Arava," Rain repeated, letting the syllables roll over his tongue. "It's beautiful. What does it mean?" "In Old Miari, one who grows from loss," Ilara explained. She touched her abdomen lightly, a gesture Rain had noticed more frequently lately. "Appropriate." Rain's eyes widened as he understood the significance of the gesture. "Ilara, are you—" She smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Yes, new life." She took his hand, placing it gently on her still, flat stomach. "Ours." 1,000 questions raced through Rain's mind. Questions about compatibility, about Miari gestation, about their uncertain future. But as he looked at Ilara, at Arava, those questions seemed unimportant beside the simple miracle of her trust, her love, her hope. "New life," he echoed, feeling wonder replace doubt. "Our child." "Yes." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Child of mud and soil, child of water and earth, child of memory and future." They sat together as the moons climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. Tomorrow there would be practical matters to discuss, preparations to make, plans to formulate. But tonight was for this moment, for the acknowledgement of what they had built together from the ruins of their separate lives. Later, as they lay in their shared bed, Rain found himself unable to sleep, his mind too full of possibilities. Beside him, Ilara, Arava, breathed the steady rhythm of sleep, one hand curled protectively over her abdomen. Carefully, so as not to wake her, Rain slipped from the bed and went to his workstation. From a sealed container, he removed one of the precious Miari soil samples, the one labeled in Nail's flowing script as Kesson Lakeshore, Sacred Ground. In the morning, he would show Arava what he planned: a small garden of Miari plants, grown from the seeds that had lain dormant in this soil for 5 years. A piece of her homeworld, preserved and renewed here on Aguar 6. A connection to the past for their child, a bridge between worlds. As dawn broke over the valley, Rain returned to bed, gathering Arava gently in his arms. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in Miyari that he didn't understand, then settled against him with a sigh of contentment. "Sleep," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her white hair. "I've got you. We're safe now. Together." "Together," she echoed drowsily, the word a promise between them. Outside their window, the pale grass rippled like waves under the early morning breeze. Within their small greenhouse, seedlings strained toward the light, roots delving deep into carefully prepared soil. And within Arava, new life grew, a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Born from mud and memory, nurtured by trust and hope, Rain closed his eyes, finally allowing sleep to claim him. Tomorrow would bring work and worry and wonder. But for now, in this moment, they were home.